Welcome back. Tonight's story is a quiet one, the kind that creeps in slowly, like fog curling under a door. We'll follow a man who lives alone at the edge of a small town, a man who's buried his past deeply, safely, or so he thought. When he takes in a stray black cat, something begins to stir. Not ghosts, not curses, something quieter, something that watches. And as the days pass, the line between memory and reality begins to slip, just a little. So settle in, let the night stretch long, and remember, not everything that watches wants to be seen. This is The Cat That Knew Too Much. Chapter 1, The Black Spot on the Door. It was a Tuesday in late October when Leonard Burr first noticed the black spot on his front door. The air had turned bitter, wind pressing through the hollows of the small coastal town like something looking for a way in. The locals said this wind made folks restless, forgetful. Leonard didn't much care for what locals said. He'd built his life around not caring. 10 years he'd lived alone in the crooked little house on Gannett Street, set back from the others, smothered in ivy and crumbling brick. He kept to himself, taught a woodworking class at the community centre once a week, volunteered at the thrift shop. He kept his past locked behind bone and blood and buried so deep he sometimes half believed it had happened to someone else. Then came the cat. He hadn't planned on it. He wasn't a pet person, but he'd gone to the grocery on a whim, and as he passed the shelter tent set up in the parking lot, he heard the crying. It wasn't loud, more like a low, persistent mewl, like a question asked again and again with no answer. The cat was black from tip to tail, no markings. Its fur looked like dark water. The shelter girl said it hadn't eaten since it arrived. She called it unlucky, then laughed nervously and said she didn't believe in that sort of thing. But Leonard, he'd looked into its eyes and thought of something else. Absolution. He brought it home. That was a week ago. The cat never made a sound after the first day, never scratched the furniture, never purred. It moved quietly, like smoke. It slept on top of the wardrobe, its green eyes reflecting back at him in the dark. Then this morning, he saw the black spot. It was just above the brass mail slot, a thumb-sized blot of pitch black like someone had pressed a burnt match to the wood. He ran his finger over it. It was sticky, almost tar-like, and it stank faintly of iron. He scrubbed it off with turpentine and a wire brush, thought no more of it. Until evening came. He had just returned from the town square, carrying a canvas bag of canned peaches and pipe tobacco. The sky was deepening to violet, and the gulls were shrieking somewhere inland. As he reached for the doorknob, he saw it again, the spot. Exactly the same size, same shape, as if it had never been touched. Leonard's gut twisted. Inside, the cat sat on the arm of the chair, tail flicking. It stared at him as he entered. There was something in its gaze, something he couldn't name. Out of the way, he muttered, brushing past. The cat didn't move. He spent the evening pacing, chewing his nails. Every time he looked at the cat, it was watching him. Not idly, not in the lazy way cats usually observe the world. No, this one was studying him, taking stock. By midnight, Leonard cracked. "Do you know something?" He snapped at it. The cat blinked. He stood abruptly and dragged an old blanket out of the hall closet. "Fine, you're sleeping in the cellar tonight." He bundled the cat in the blanket and carried it down the crooked stairs to the root cellar. The old place was musty and cold, lined with the smell of rot and mildew. He set the cat down on the dirt floor and shut the door. For a long moment there was silence. No scratching, no cries, only the wind at the windows like someone whispering a secret too close to the ear. Then Leonard climbed into bed, heart hammering. He dreamed of water, deep, dark water, a rowboat floating aimlessly through fog, a heavy sack tied with rope, and the unmistakable scent of blood on his hands. When he woke, the cellar door was open. The blanket was in the middle of the kitchen floor, neatly folded. And the cat was sitting in his chair, waiting. Its green eyes didn't blink, not once. Leonard stared at it for a full minute before backing out of the room and into the hallway. He didn't breathe until he reached the bathroom. Locking the door behind him, he ran cold water over his wrists. "This is nothing," he told himself. "You're tired. You're getting old. Things slip." He dared a look in the mirror. The face staring back was tired, yes, pale. Lines carved deep around his eyes, but it was still his face. Still the same man who had 10 years ago driven through the marsh at night with a passenger seat stained red. The same man who had dropped the body into the reeds and driven home with the radio turned loud to drown the silence. He hadn't said her name in a decade, hadn't dared to. The papers had blamed someone else, a drifter. That man had hung himself in jail before trial. Clean escape. So why now? Why the cat? Back in the hallway, he could hear the soft creak of floorboards. The cat was walking the house. That night, as he sat in his room with the door locked and a chair pushed up under the knob, he saw it again. The black spot. This time it was on his bedroom window. Outside, under the frost-glazed glass, a round patch of pitch black still glistening. Leonard didn't sleep. When dawn came, the window was clean again. Chapter 2. The Name Beneath the Floorboards. Leonard avoided the house all morning. He walked down Gannett Street to the corner cafe, where the coffee was thin and bitter, and the waitress Margot never asked questions. He sat by the window, hands cupped around the cracked mug, and stared out at the street as the town stirred to life. Buses hissed. Shopkeepers unlocked doors. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes clinked like teeth. He sipped the coffee slowly, as if drinking too fast would mean returning sooner. Back at the house, the cat would be waiting. He didn't name it. He refused to. Naming a thing gave it power, made it permanent. He'd learned that lesson a long time ago. Some things were best left unnamed, buried beneath mud and memory. But it felt like the cat was watching him even now. He saw it in the way people glanced at him from the sidewalk, too long, too curious. He saw it in the way the wind carried strange sounds through the alley. Last night he could have sworn he heard whispering beneath the floorboards. He paid for his coffee and left without saying goodbye. When he returned, the house was still. He opened the front door slowly, half expecting to see the cat sitting in the same chair, tail flicking like a metronome. But the living room was empty. The air smelled faintly of smoke and damp leaves. A single beam of sunlight slanted through the dusty blinds, casting long bars of shadow across the rug. And the spot, the black spot, was gone. Not just cleaned. Gone. Leonard stood frozen in the doorway for a long moment, then set down his coat and stepped cautiously into the room. "Cat?" he said, not quite a question, more a nervous test of presence. No answer, but something had changed. The old plank floor in the hallway, always a little warped, always whining under his step, felt tighter beneath his feet, as if something had been disturbed. He knelt, placed his ear to the boards. Nothing. No sound. Then he saw it. Just beneath the radiator, tucked behind a seam in the floorboard, something glinted. He reached for it, fingers trembling, and pulled out a slim sliver of paper, old and yellowing. On it, written in dark ink, were 3 words. "We know, Leonard." He dropped it like it burned him. His heart kicked against his ribs. Someone was playing with him. Had to be. Maybe a kid from town, some prank. Maybe Margot had said something, or one of the shelter workers. Maybe he talked in his sleep. The thought chilled him. He turned. The cat sat on the staircase halfway up, its head tilted slightly. It blinked, slow and deliberate. Leonard opened his mouth, closed it. "I buried it," he said aloud, voice hoarse. "I buried it so deep they'd never find it." The cat didn't move. Leonard took a slow step forward. This is madness. Still no movement. Something inside him, a forgotten splinter of rage, flared up. "I did what I had to do. She would have ruined everything. She..." His voice cracked. "You don't know. You're just a damn cat." The cat turned and disappeared up the stairs. Leonard followed. He hadn't been upstairs in weeks. He kept to the lower floors since his knees started aching last year. The second floor still smelled of mothballs and mildew. The doors to the guest rooms were all closed, except the one at the end of the hall. It was ajar. That had once been her room. He pushed it open. The light bulb above flickered weakly, illuminating faded wallpaper and a rust-stained vanity mirror. Dust drifted in the air like falling snow. He hadn't touched this room since before. The cat was sitting on the windowsill. There, scratched faintly into the glass, so faint it could have been missed if not for the angle of the light, was a name. Marla. Leonard stared. His breath caught in his throat. No one knew that name. Not anymore. Not since the police gave up and the newspapers found other tragedies to chase. Marla. She was a part of him once. She laughed too loud and talked with her hands and never once asked him to be something he wasn't. Until that night, until she saw what she wasn't meant to. He touched the glass, fingers trembling. The scratching was shallow, delicate, not done with a blade or knife, almost as if made by a claw. He turned to the cat, whose tail thumped once against the windowsill. "What are you?" It blinked. He backed away slowly, shutting the door behind him, sealing the name and the memory inside. He stumbled back down the stairs, gripping the railing like a drowning man. The house was colder than before and quieter. He lit the stove in the kitchen, poured himself a shot of rye from the bottle behind the tins, and sat at the table. He needed to think, needed to ground himself. 10 years of silence, of pretending, of blending in. He had earned his peace. Then he heard it, a sound like digging, faint, rhythmic, coming from the crawlspace under the house. Leonard froze. The wind outside stilled. Even the gulls had gone quiet. The digging continued. He grabbed the flashlight from the drawer, and against every bone in his body, screaming, "Don't!" he opened the crawlspace hatch beside the pantry. Dust billowed. The smell of old soil and forgotten things filled his lungs. The beam of light swept over cobwebs, pipes, the old gas line, and then scratch, scratch, just out of sight. He crawled in. The sound grew louder. Then all at once it stopped. He turned the corner and found nothing, no animal, no hole, just dry earth. But on the ground before him was a collar, small, black. The name tag rusted nearly beyond recognition. He wiped it clean. There, etched into metal, was the name. Marla. Chapter 3. Something living in the walls. Leonard didn't sleep that night. The collar sat on the kitchen table like a curse made solid, its rusted tag catching the dim light from the single bulb overhead. The name Marla no longer felt like a memory, but a living accusation. He stared at it for hours. He tried to convince himself it was just coincidence. Maybe the collar had belonged to a cat the previous owner lost. Maybe it wasn't her name at all. Maybe he was seeing things. But the sound, that awful digging from under the house, it hadn't been imagined. And neither was the scratching he now heard behind the walls. It had started after midnight, a faint, rhythmic scrape just behind the pantry. It moved slowly, as if following him through the walls, from kitchen to hall, then up the stairs. He pressed his ear to the wallpaper in the corridor and heard what sounded like breathing, deep and soft, like something sleeping in there, dreaming of the earth. He spoke aloud softly, like a man afraid of waking something. "Is it you?" No answer. Only the quiet knock-knock-knock of movement inside the walls. He stayed up until dawn, the cat never far from him. It slinked from room to room in silence, never meowing, always just watching. Leonard tried to ignore it, but he couldn't. By morning, he'd made a decision. He'd go to Father O'Connell. The priest had retired years ago, moved into a single-room flat above the liquor store. Leonard had avoided him ever since the night he lied during confession. But if anyone in town knew how to fix what was happening to him, it'd be O'Connell, or at least help him bury the guilt again. He left the house by 6 a.m., not bothering to lock the door behind him. Let the cat run free. Let it burn the place down if it wanted. When he got to the priest's apartment, it took 5 minutes of pounding before the door creaked open. Father O'Connell looked worse than Leonard remembered. Older, thinner, hollow-eyed, like something had been gnawing on him from the inside. He looked at Leonard as if seeing a ghost. "Leonard Burr," he muttered. "I'd wondered when you'd show up." Leonard blinked. You remember me?" "I remember the kind of silence you brought with you." O'Connell stepped aside, gesturing him in. "Sit down before you faint. You look like someone who's been seeing things." Leonard did as he was told. The flat smelled like incense and burnt coffee. There was a crucifix above every doorway, and what looked like scratched-out chalk symbols beneath the windowsills. O'Connell poured a cup of something dark and bitter-smelling and set it in front of him. "Start talking." Leonard hesitated. Then he said, "I think something followed me home." The priest raised an eyebrow. Leonard continued, "It's a cat, black, showed up a week ago. Since then, things have been happening. Small things. A mark on the door, a name scratched in glass, a collar in the crawl space." O'Connell didn't blink. "I buried someone 10 years ago," Leonard added quietly. "Someone I loved, but I buried her all the same." Silence settled. Then O'Connell said, "And now you think the cat knows?" Leonard swallowed. "I think it's more than that. I think it remembers." The priest stood, walked to a dusty bookshelf and pulled out an old leather-bound book. He flipped it open, ran a finger along its yellowed pages. "Animals," he said softly, "have always been the messengers. In some traditions, cats carry the soul across the river. In others, they're the first to smell guilt. There are stories of felines that return to the place where death was cheated." He looked up. "Did you cheat death, Leonard?" Leonard stared down at his hands. "I don't know. I thought I buried it. I thought the river had taken it all. Rivers don't keep secrets. They just move them." Leonard stood suddenly, heart pounding. "I need to get rid of it." O'Connell shook his head. "You can't kill it. Not if it's what I think it is." "What is it?" The priest looked away. A witness. He returned home by noon. The house looked the same, quiet grey in the afternoon, but something was different. The moment he stepped inside, he felt it. The air was thicker, wetter. The cat was gone. He called out cautiously, no response. The house creaked under his feet, more than usual. He moved from room to room, checking behind doors, under tables, even inside the pantry. Then he heard it. A meow. But it wasn't a normal meow. It came from deep within the walls, muffled, strained, as if something was trapped. He pressed his ear to the kitchen wall again. Scrape. Scrape. Meow. He staggered backward. The sound wasn't coming from the cat, it was coming for it. He grabbed the hammer from the toolbox under the sink and returned to the wall. Hands shaking, he began to tear at the plaster. Behind it, rotted insulation gave way to shadowy void. The beam of his flashlight barely reached the back. And then, eyes. Bright green and watching. The cat blinked once. Then it stepped backward, disappearing into the darkness. Leonard reached in. Something cold brushed his hand. He recoiled and dropped the flashlight. In the beam of its flickering cone, he saw it. A handprint, human-sized, pressed in ash on the far wall of the crawl space. He backed away, heart thundering. The scratching behind the walls returned, faster now, more urgent. Something was moving through the house behind the plaster. Something that knew him. Something that remembered her name. As Leonard fled to the living room, he saw something new on the front door. Not a black spot this time, but claw marks. 4 of them, carved deep into the wood, like someone or something wanted out. Chapter 4, The Missing Journal. By the time Leonard came back to himself, he was seated at the kitchen table, fists clenched, breath coming too fast. The front door still bore the gouges, deep and ragged, but in the soft morning light they looked less like claw marks, and more like he'd done it himself. He looked down, dirt under his fingernails, splinters in the skin. The hammer lay on the floor beside the wall he'd torn open, and the cat was gone. No rustling, no green eyes watching him from the shadows. Nothing. Leonard remained there for an hour, trying to piece it all together, but his thoughts were static and smoke. He kept going over the timeline, the markings, the whispering sounds he thought he heard behind the walls, the names scratched into the window pane, the collar. Couldn't it all be explained? People lose time. Grief has a long tail. He might have scratched the glass years ago. Maybe the name hadn't been Marla. Maybe it was just the way the light bent through old glass. He tried to convince himself. He almost succeeded, until he noticed something else missing. His journal. It wasn't much, just a leather-bound notebook he'd kept hidden beneath the floorboard in the bedroom closet. Not a diary exactly, but a place where he wrote things down when they threatened to bubble up. Ugly things. His past, her face. He hadn't touched it in months, maybe years. But now, kneeling there, fingers searching the gap in the wood, it was gone. Gone. The floorboard had been lifted, gently, expertly, and replaced. Dust brushed away, just enough to pass a casual glance. He stood slowly, knees aching, breath unsteady. Someone had been in here, not the cat. Someone. That word felt worse than any ghost or curse. Someone real, with hands and knowledge. Maybe they had watched him, followed him, maybe they knew everything. He thought of the note under the floorboard. "We know, Leonard." And something else broke loose in him. He checked every lock in the house, deadbolts, window latches, even the sliding bolt on the root cellar door. He nailed a plank across the crawlspace opening. Then he turned off every light except the lamp in the living room and sat in his chair, a heavy wrench across his lap. The silence felt thick, pregnant with a question he didn't want to answer. Then came the knock. Soft, 3 taps, like knuckles brushing a hollow drum. Not at the front door, at the window. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Then again, 3 taps. He stood slowly, muscles stiff, and stepped to the curtain. He pulled it aside just an inch. Nothing, no figure, no movement. But something sat on the porch railing. A small black notebook. His journal. He opened the door, scanned the street, empty. It was nearly midnight. The street lamps buzzed. A fox darted across the road, vanishing into the hedges. No sign of anyone. He picked up the notebook and closed the door. Back inside, he placed it on the table and stared at it for a long time before opening the first page. Most of it was his handwriting. But on the last page, a new entry had appeared. The date was yesterday. He hadn't written it. I saw her again in the mirror. She was wearing the same dress, the green one with the little flowers. Her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear the words. Only the cat looked at me. It looked and didn't blink. I think she's still here, under the floor, waiting. Leonard read it again and again. The words began to feel familiar, like he could almost remember writing them. But he couldn't. He flipped the page. Below the journal entry was a photo, old faded, black and white, a girl standing on a dock, wind in her hair, laughing. Marla. His hands began to shake. He didn't own this photo. He never took one. And no one else had either. They were careful. They kept it quiet, private, no evidence. So how had this photo surfaced? Who took it? And more importantly, who put it in his journal? He couldn't stay here. Not another night. He grabbed his keys and coat and made it as far as the front door before he heard it again. The cat. A soft meow from the hallway. He turned slowly. It sat there in the dark, barely visible except for the glint of its eyes. It didn't move, didn't blink. It was just watching. And for a moment, Leonard saw something in its eyes. Not intelligence. Something worse. Recognition. He stayed that night in his truck, parked beneath the cliff road just outside town. The wind howled, and his dreams were hot and feverish. When he woke, his hands were covered in scratches. Thin, shallow, like claws had dragged across them in his sleep. He looked in the mirror and swore he saw movement behind him in the back seat. But when he turned, nothing was there. Only the faintest trace of black fur. Chapter 5. All the Quiet Places. The next morning was colder than usual. Leonard sat stiffly in his truck, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching the sunrise peel over the ridgeline like a wound opening. He hadn't slept. Not really. Just drifted in and out of feverish thoughts. The scratches on his hands were raw and red now. He didn't go back to the house. Not at first. Instead, he drove. No destination, just movement. Roads became alleys. Alleys became old service tracks winding through pine forests and half-abandoned trailer parks. He stopped only once at a gas station on Route 7. Bought a thermos of coffee. The woman behind the counter didn't speak. She watched him too long, though. He felt like the word guilty was written across his face. He returned to the house just after noon. The door was unlocked. The cat was gone. Inside, nothing was out of place. But that only made it worse, because he knew something had been changed. Just slightly. A book out of place, a drawer left half open, his toothbrush dry, though he'd left it wet, a faint, lingering smell, rosemary and bleach. He moved through each room, heart pounding, ears tuned to every creak and shift of the old beams. In the upstairs hallway, he paused outside Marla's old room. He hadn't opened that door since he'd seen the name etched in glass. Now he did. The room looked the same. Faded wallpaper, dust-choked curtains, the broken vanity mirror that once held her hairbrush. Except the name in the glass was gone, scratched clean. He walked up to it, ran a finger across the surface. Smooth, no marks. Had he imagined it? Had any of it happened? He turned back and nearly tripped over the cat. It had appeared silently, sitting in the exact center of the room. Leonard backed up slowly. The cat moved forward, pacing toward the wardrobe in the corner. It stopped, sat and stared up at the latch. Leonard followed its gaze. There was something tucked beneath the wardrobe door. He crouched, reached under, a cassette tape, unlabeled, covered in dust. He hadn't owned a tape recorder in decades. But there was one in the attic, a cheap portable deck he used to record woodshop lessons. He'd nearly forgotten about it. He climbed the attic stairs slowly, the tape clutched in his sweating palm. The attic was thick with mildew and rotting insulation. Yellow light filtered through a cracked skylight. He found the recorder beneath a pile of old magazines and plugged it into the wall. When he pressed play, there was silence, then static, then a voice. "Leonard, I saw you. I saw what you did." He dropped the recorder, heart hammering. The voice was faint, warbled by age or recording quality, but it was unmistakably hers. Marla. He let it play. "You didn't mean to, I know, but you still did it. You still left me there. The river doesn't wash away everything, Leonard." Click, silence. He replayed it, over and over. The voice never changed. How had someone recorded her? Who else knew? And why now? By nightfall, Leonard had stopped trying to rationalize. There was someone toying with him. He was sure of it. Maybe it was Marla's brother, that drunk from Shalesbury who'd sworn she'd been seeing someone. Maybe it was a neighbour, or the girl from the shelter. Maybe the cat had a tracker. Maybe he was being filmed. The idea wasn't far-fetched. He'd seen shows, true crime podcasts. Maybe it was revenge. He spent the next hour disassembling the cat's collar, though he didn't remember ever putting one on it. Still, he checked for wires, GPS chips, even pinholes in the walls around the house. Nothing. The cat watched him from the top of the stairs. He went to the shed behind the house and pulled out the sledgehammer. He was going to destroy the crawl space. The floor gave way more easily than he expected. Plank by plank, he pried up the boards in the hallway, revealing the packed dirt and crumbling insulation beneath. As he worked, he began muttering to himself, low, urgent things. Not quite sentences. The cat never left the stairs. Finally, when most of the floor was torn up, Leonard stood in the centre of the hallway, panting. There was no body, no bones, nothing. He didn't know if he felt relief or horror, because he remembered burying her here, right here. He dropped the hammer, then sat down in the wreckage of his own floor. Was it all imagined? Had he dreamed it? Was he protecting himself from something else entirely? Later in the bathroom, Leonard washed his hands. The dirt ran down the drain in long black streaks. His reflection looked back at him, hollow-eyed and pale. Then he noticed the door behind him. It was open just an inch. He hadn't left it that way. He turned slowly, dread climbing his throat. On the bathroom floor sat a Polaroid. It showed a man standing over a body near the river. The photo was grainy, but the posture, the coat, the expression, it was unmistakably Leonard. There was writing on the bottom of the photo, smudged in blue pen. This is where it started. He bent down, hand trembling, and picked it up. There was no date, no signature. He had no memory of this photo being taken, but the place, it was real. The riverbank at the base of Hollow Creek, the last place he saw her. The cat brushed against his leg and then padded out of the room. That night, Leonard didn't sleep. He sat in his chair, staring at the Polaroid, the cassette tape, and the journal lined up neatly in front of him. Objects that shouldn't exist, truths that had slipped out of the dark and taken shape. At some point, the cat climbed into his lap, and this time it purred. Long, deep, vibrating right through his bones. It didn't blink, didn't look away. And in its eyes, Leonard didn't see judgment, only certainty. Chapter 6. Hollow Creek. By the third night, Leonard could no longer be sure whether he was remembering things or inventing them. The house smelled like the inside of a locked trunk. Damp wood, sweat, and old paper. He sat in the living room, surrounded by evidence. The photo, the tape, the journal. Each artifact whispering, "You did this." Not like an accusation, more like a reminder. The cat hadn't left his side all day. At one point, it sat on the dining table and began pouring the journal, softly, insistently, until it slid open to a page Leonard didn't remember writing. It read, "Go back, it's still there." He stared at the page for a long time, willing it to be a joke, a sick trick by someone who had broken into his house. But the handwriting, it was unmistakably his, shaky and uneven, but familiar, the way he always wrote when he was trying not to cry. He stared at the words until they no longer looked like language. Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and went to the shed. The shovel was still there, leaning against the wall beside the rusted snow tires, same one he'd used 10 years ago, same one he swore he'd never touch again. He drove to Hollow Creek, under a sky smeared with low clouds, headlights sweeping through mist and rain-slicked pines. The dirt road wound down into the ravine, flanked by skeletal trees. The river was swollen from the last week of storms, its waters black and fast. Leonard parked near the old wooden bridge and killed the engine. For a moment he sat in the dark, listening to the wind comb through the trees. Then he opened the door. The smell hit him first. Rotting leaves, mud, something fouler underneath. The past. The path down to the river's edge was steep. His boots slipped more than once, nearly sending him tumbling. But he made it. And when he stood on the bank, staring out at the churning water, he felt it again, like time had folded in on itself. This is where it happened, where her scarf snagged on a tree root, where her body lay motionless, half submerged, where he'd dragged her, where he told himself it wasn't murder if she never woke up. He picked a spot farther up the bank and began digging. The earth fought him. The shovel bit into roots and clay. Each scoop made him feel sicker, more certain. His back ached, his knuckles bled, but he kept going, because something inside him needed to see, to know. After 2 hours, he hit something. He froze. The metal edge had struck something hollow. He dropped to his knees, hands clawing at the dirt. It wasn't a coffin, not even a proper grave. It was a shallow depression wrapped in tarp and rope. His stomach turned. He peeled back the layers. Inside nothing. No bones, no fabric, just damp earth and black water. He rocked back on his heels, heart pounding in his ears. Had someone moved her? Had he? He couldn't remember. The world tilted slightly. He sat there in the hole until the rain started. Then he heard it, just above the wind. A meow, soft, clear. He turned. The cat stood at the edge of the ravine, just beyond the trees. It stared down at him. Leonard tried to speak, but no words came. His throat was full of river water. He returned home in silence. His hands were shaking. The cat climbed into his lap again and curled up like nothing had happened. He stared out the window, the sound of the river still in his ears. He remembered things now. Small things. The last thing Marla said to him. The bruises on her neck. The silence in the car as he drove past the gas station. The way her hand slid from his arm as he rolled her out. He did remember. He'd just spent 10 years pretending he didn't, and now the past was undoing itself. Bit by bit. That night, Leonard sat at the dining room table and wrote a letter. He wasn't sure who it was for. He wrote about the silence, about memory, about how guilt doesn't knock all at once. It drips, day by day, until your house is soaked. He didn't sign it, didn't need to. Then he tore it up, fed it to the fire, and returned to his chair. The cat joined him. Together they stared at the black window, waiting for something neither of them would say aloud. Chapter 7. The days passed in fragments. Leonard stopped checking clocks. They made no difference now. He slept in the afternoons, ate when he remembered, and walked through the house like a man trying to memorize it before it disappeared. The cat was always nearby. He no longer found it strange. In fact, the cat's presence felt necessary, like ballast, something to stop him from floating off into his own mind. It didn't speak, didn't blink often, didn't demand affection. It just sat. Observed. That was the word Leonard kept coming back to. It wasn't just a pet. It was an observer. And in that silence, he began to think back on the years after Marla died. The ones he used to call peaceful. They weren't. They were quiet, yes, but the kind of quiet that molds, the quiet that grows soft around the edges and begins to rot. Every kindness he performed had been a performance, every volunteer hour a substitution for truth. The community had accepted him because he had asked nothing of them, and in return he gave them a shape they could understand. The quiet widower, the solitary man with a shadowed past. They didn't know he had built the quiet himself, nailed it down, buried it deep, called it healing. But the cat knew. He found another note, this one pinned beneath the fridge magnet shaped like a trout, something Marla had once picked up at a roadside market. He hadn't noticed it in years, but now the magnet held a small piece of torn paper. You were seen. No explanation. No handwriting he recognized. Leonard sat down, the paper clutched in his fingers, and tried to breathe. What did it mean? Seen by whom? Could someone else have been in the woods that night? Could someone have watched him drag her body through the reeds and leave it by the waterline? His stomach churned. Maybe the cat wasn't the problem at all. Maybe the cat was just a symbol, a stand-in for something larger. A witness he had imagined so he wouldn't have to consider the possibility that a real one had been there all along. He stood suddenly, heart pounding. He needed to know who had lived near Hollow Creek 10 years ago. At the local library, tucked between a display of Halloween cookbooks and a poster warning about radon gas, Leonard found the town registry archive. It took him an hour to orient himself. The smell of old paper and cheap binding glue made him dizzy. He pulled every directory from the early 2010s, cross-checked addresses, street names. Near Hollow Creek, there was only one occupied property within a mile. D. Stillman, 115 Shade Hollow Road. Leonard sat back, blinking at the name. Stillman. That name stirred something unpleasant in him. Not memory, exactly, more like emotional recoil. He scribbled the address on a notepad and left. The Stillman house sat at the edge of the tree line, a collapsed fence curling like an old scar around the yard. It looked abandoned from the road. No tire tracks, no light in the windows, not even a mailbox. But the front door was shut tight. Leonard got out of the truck and stepped carefully up the walkway. He knocked. Nothing. He knocked again. Still nothing. He was about to turn back when he noticed something strange, an indentation on the porch railing, circular, slightly rusty, as if someone had placed a dish there, a cat bowl. Next to it was a small tuft of black fur. His stomach sank. Back home, the cat was waiting on the windowsill. Leonard stepped inside, staring at it. "Where did you come from?" The cat tilted its head. "Did someone send you?" No answer. "I want to know what you're doing here. Why now? Why after 10 years? Still, silence. He moved closer. "I can't live like this anymore. I can't." His voice cracked. "I need to know." He picked up the cat gently, held it close, forehead against fur. The warmth of it made him want to weep. "I'll tell them," he whispered. "I'll confess. Maybe it's not too late." The cat made no sound. That night, Leonard wrote a letter to the police. He left out no detail. The fight, the way she fell, the decision not to call for help, the dragging, the burial, the silence. He printed it, signed it. He placed it in an envelope and left it on the mantel. The next morning it was gone. No sign of forced entry, no wind to blow it away. Just gone. He looked to the cat. It stared back, blank and patient. Later that day, Leonard took a walk through the town square. For the first time in years, he looked at the people passing by. The man at the hardware store. The teenagers smoking behind the cafe. Margot wiping down tables. Did one of them know? Had they always? Had he been the only one playing dumb? He returned home shaken, certain now that the observer hadn't been the cat. Not really. The cat was just a trigger, a presence that let him see the truth he had tried to scrub clean. It wasn't what the cat was. It was what the cat allowed. That night, Leonard stood in front of the mirror. He stared into his own eyes and asked a question aloud. "Did you kill her?" There was no answer, but something in his reflection looked away. Chapter 8. What the Mirror Saw. The house no longer felt like home. It didn't feel like anything. Just walls, hollowed by time and stripped of illusion. Leonard drifted from room to room, avoiding eye contact with mirrors and windows. He kept the lights off most of the time now. It felt easier to think in the dark. The cat followed him, as always. But something had changed. Where once it perched silently or dozed in corners, now it watched him with a new kind of intensity. Like it expected something. Not obedience, not affection, but honesty. That made Leonard afraid. He hadn't been honest in years, not with anyone, least of all himself. The envelope never reappeared. Not in the trash, not in the fireplace, not under the bed. He searched the house for it 4 times. On the 5th, he found something else instead. Inside the linen closet, behind a stack of old winter coats, was a small cardboard box he didn't remember placing there. Dust-covered. Unlabelled. He pulled it out and opened it. Inside, a red scarf, stained brown in one corner. Her scarf. He remembered the way it flapped out of her coat sleeve as she fell backward into the river. The current had pulled it from her neck, wrapped it around a rock like a flag at half-mast. He never went back for it. But here it was. Folded. Cleaned. Waiting. He dropped the box and stumbled back, heart racing. That night Leonard couldn't sleep. He stood at the bathroom mirror, looking for signs of something, anything to tell him this wasn't real, that it was a breakdown, a grief spasm, a prolonged episode of guilt that could be medicated away. But the mirror didn't lie. It showed him who he was. A man alone, aging, hollow, pretending. He leaned forward and whispered, "She didn't scream." The mirror said nothing. "She didn't even fight me," he added, as if defending himself. She just asked me why. That was it. No anger, no shouting, just why." He clenched his jaw until it hurt. "She made me feel like the monster, like I was the one ruining everything." His voice shook. "I didn't plan it. I just acted." He blinked and caught movement behind him. The cat, sitting silently in the doorway backlit by the hallway light. In the reflection it looked enormous, like it filled the entire hallway. Leonard turned quickly, but the cat hadn't moved. He returned to the mirror, stared, and something was different now. In the mirror, his face remained unchanged, but there was a streak of red running along the collar of his shirt. He touched his neck. Nothing, no stain, no cut. But in the mirror, the red was still there, thicker now. He stepped back, and the reflection didn't. He fled the room, shaking, swearing under his breath. He didn't sleep that night either. The cat crawled into his lap around dawn and began to purr. This time it sounded like water lapping against stone. He started talking to Marla, quietly. At first just in the living room when no one else was there, then in the kitchen, then in the hallway. Eventually he spoke to her in bed, whispering apologies, excuses, justifications, until the words felt like prayers without gods. "I never hated you," he said one morning. "Not even when you told me you were leaving. I wanted to stop time, that's all. Just hold everything where it was." He wiped his face. "I didn't know how to let go." The cat purred softly, days blurred. The world outside didn't seem to notice he was falling apart. Mail came, leaves turned, the sun kept rising. And then one afternoon, while going through a box of old tax forms, Leonard found a postcard. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It just had a single sentence scrawled across it. "You'll tell the truth, or it will tell it for you." He turned it over, blank. The handwriting didn't match his, but it felt familiar. Like someone mimicking the way he used to write, before his hands got stiff and clumsy. He crumpled it and threw it in the trash. The cat knocked over the bin later that night, and the postcard was gone. The next morning, Leonard received a call. He hadn't heard his landline ring in weeks. He picked it up, expecting a robocall, but the voice on the other end was male. Calm, unfamiliar. "Mr. Burr," it said, "we're reviewing open case files from 2015, specifically missing persons cases." Leonard said nothing. The voice continued, "Marla Dean, you were mentioned in her diary. Did you know that?" Leonard's mouth went dry. "We'd like to ask you a few questions," the voice said. "Shouldn't take long." He hung up without responding. Sat in the silence, the cat leapt onto the counter and stared at him, and in its eyes Leonard saw what he'd been refusing to see. There was no ghost, no magic, no malevolent force, only truth, and it had been clawing its way to the surface the whole time. Chapter 9, That Witness. The next morning, Leonard woke up before dawn. He hadn't really slept, just drifted somewhere between thought and memory, watching Marla's face drift in and out of shadow, her eyes never accusing, just sad. He hadn't seen that expression on her face in 10 years, and now it was the only one he could picture. The phone hadn't rung again, but he knew it would, and this time he wouldn't hang up. He dressed deliberately. Button-down shirt, slacks, the kind of outfit one might wear to church or court. He stood in front of the mirror as he tied his belt, half expecting to see another streak of blood on his collar or something standing just behind him. But the mirror was clean now. Just him. Thin. Older than he remembered. No defense left in the posture. Downstairs, the cat sat on the table, grooming its paw. He approached slowly and placed a single sheet of paper next to it, his final letter. This one wasn't meant to be mailed. It simply read, "I loved her." That was the beginning and the end of it. But sometimes love doesn't forgive. Sometimes it curdles and stains everything. If you find this house, you'll know what happened. Look behind the plaster. Look beneath the bed. The evidence is no longer hidden, not because it returned, but because I stopped hiding it. I know the difference now between guilt and punishment, one you run from, the other you invite in. He folded it, placed it in the center of the table. The cat sniffed it, then walked away. At the police station, the clerk barely glanced up as he approached the counter. "I'm here to make a statement," Leonard said. The clerk looked at him, really looked, and slowly reached for a clipboard. "Name?" "Leonard Burr." Something flickered across her face. She paused. "Have a seat." He did, and for a moment everything felt very still. They led him into a back room after 15 minutes. The detective was young, polite. His name was Munro. He offered Leonard water, asked if he needed a lawyer. Leonard shook his head. "No, just a recorder and maybe a pen." Munro obliged. Leonard took a breath, and then he told everything. Not just the river, not just that night, but the guilt that followed. The silence, the way Marla's name became unsayable, the cat, the way it watched him, the objects, the recordings, the creeping certainty that someone or something had kept score. Munro listened, patient, silent. Occasionally he scribbled a note. When Leonard finished, the room felt colder. He sat back in his chair and stared at the floor. "What happens now?" he asked. Munro didn't answer right away. Then, carefully, he said, "There's no open file for Marla Dean, no active investigation, no body was ever recovered. There was a missing persons report, but it was withdrawn 5 months later." Leonard looked up. "What?" Munro shrugged. "It says she left town, started a new life. There's even a letter signed in her name." Leonard's breath caught. No, I saw her. I buried her. She didn't write anything. He pressed his hands to his temples. "Are you saying she's alive?" "I'm saying," Munro said slowly, "you confessed to something we don't have the evidence to verify. No witness, no forensic record, nothing." Leonard stood too quickly, his chair scraping across the linoleum. "I'm not making this up," he said. "I didn't imagine it. The tape, the photo, the scarf, the cat." "What cat?" Leonard froze. "It was there," he said, "at the house, at Hollow Creek. It followed me. It brought me the journal." Munro folded his hands calmly. "Mr. Burr, there's no cat mentioned in your report, or in any witness accounts. Your house was searched after your statement. Nothing unusual was found." Leonard swallowed. "That's not possible." But Munro was already standing. "If there's anything more you'd like to add, we'll take your full deposition. But without new evidence, we can't prosecute what isn't provable." He paused. "You're free to go, Mr. Burr." Leonard walked home slowly. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't call anyone, just moved like a man without shadow. The cat was waiting on the porch. As he climbed the steps, he stared at it. "You were never here, were you?" The cat blinked. "Or maybe you always were." It leapt down from the railing and disappeared into the hedges. He didn't follow. Inside, the house was quiet. He poured himself a glass of water. Sat in the kitchen. The letter he'd written was gone. No signs of disturbance, no paw prints, no muddy footprints, just absence. And Leonard left alone with what could not be disproven. Not innocence, not guilt, just memory. Chapter 10. The sound of scratching. It rained the night Leonard returned. Not a storm, just a slow, deliberate drizzle that lasted into dawn. The kind of rain that turns silence into a presence. A watcher. He stayed up, sitting in the armchair facing the hallway. The floorboards he'd torn up weeks ago were now patched roughly with plywood, uneven and raw. He couldn't bring himself to fix them properly. Every nail felt like a lie. He watched the door, waited for the cat. It never came. Instead, he began to hear the sound again, the one he'd nearly forgotten. Scratching. Faint. Behind the walls. Not mice. Not the settling of old wood. Rhythmic. Intentional. He pressed his ear to the plaster. It stopped. Then started again. In the bedroom wall. Then the kitchen. Then beneath the floor. Leonard didn't move. He sat still as the scratching crept from one end of the house to the other, always staying just out of reach, like a sound from memory you can't quite place. He closed his eyes, and for the first time let himself wonder something terrible. What if he hadn't buried her? What if she had only been unconscious? What if he had heard the scratching once before, years ago, and told himself it was nothing? What if the silence was never forgiveness? What if it was just waiting? By morning, the scratching had stopped. But something else had changed. In the mirror above the hallway table, Leonard noticed it immediately. A new reflection. The same hallway, same angle, but there was someone standing behind him. He turned quickly. Nothing there. He turned back to the mirror. The figure was closer now, not a ghost, not a shadow, just her. Marla, hair damp, skin pale, eyes open, mouth moving but making no sound. Leonard staggered back. The mirror remained unchanged. The letter he'd written, the one left on the table, was back in his hand. He opened it. It had been rewritten. The ink was darker, the handwriting no longer his. She knocked for hours. You just turned up the music. You buried her breathing. We heard it. He dropped the letter. Fell to his knees. He heard the scratching again, this time directly under the floor. This time he knew it wasn't imagined. This time he remembered. 10 years ago, Leonard had not checked for a pulse. Not really. 10 years ago, he had told himself what he needed to hear, that she was already gone, that it was better this way, that no one would come looking. But they did, and now he knew who had knocked at the door that night. The black mark on the wood, it hadn't been tar, it had been blood from her fingers. He stood, walked to the tool shed, came back with a sledgehammer, and began to tear open the floor again. This time, he wasn't searching for evidence. He was answering. Each strike cracked open time itself. The wood splintered, and the house seemed to moan. He pulled up the boards, clawed at the dirt until his nails bled. And then, there it was, a schmoll, wrapped in plastic, still. But the plastic was torn near the top. Inside, the remains of a mouth, open in a scream, fingernails, red fabric, a single clump of black hair, not fur, hair. He crawled backward, hand to his chest. The cat stood at the far end of the hallway now, silent, no longer watching, just present, as if it had done its job, as if it was no longer needed. Leonard looked at the body again and remembered finally, fully, what she had said as he held her down. You don't have to do this. He remembered what he'd whispered back. I already did. The police never found the cat. Neighbours said Leonard had called them himself, said he sounded calm, quiet, said he gave them the exact location of the body, told them his name, and that he'd been waiting 10 years to tell the truth. But when they arrived, he was gone. The house was empty, no blood, no sign of struggle, just one open journal page on the kitchen table. The cat was never mine, it was hers. I just heard it too late. And sometimes late at night, the new tenant hears it too, a scratching behind the walls and a soft purring sound from beneath the bed. And once, just once, a quiet voice from the dark hallway. Let me out. The end. Thank you for listening. That was The Cat That Knew Too Much. A quiet descent into guilt, memory, and the kind of truth that waits patiently in the dark. Was the cat ever really there, or was it just something Leonard needed, something watching until he was ready to see? Sometimes we bury things so deep we forget they were ever real. But they remember. Sleep well tonight, and if you hear scratching behind the walls, don't get up. It probably knows you're listening.